Welcome back, guys. It's the Queen of Spades. So I'm coming at you today on this Saturday. I am feeling a little better than I did the last video that I made. I actually went to see the Us movie like last weekend. So it's been quite a few days, but I was trying to recoup so that I wouldn't sound like a frog on video. Even though my voice is naturally like kind of deeper, I guess, than a normal female's voice would be. Anyway, so the Us movie, I wanted to give my take on it. I see that there are others that have given their takes on it. And I have not watched it yet because I didn't want to end up saying what anyone else said. So in order for me to keep my collective thoughts of my own, I purposefully didn't watch anyone else's take on it. And hopefully after this movie, I can listen to what others dissected, from it. So, okay, the Us movie. Us, first of all, you can look at it as us. You can look at it as US. I found a couple of different parts of the movie pretty interesting, and I wanted to go through them one by one. So, okay, when you look at the mother's nervousness in the beginning, basically I concluded, very simplistically actually, that her nervousness was stemming not from the fact that someone was coming for her and she was just this innocent victim in the situation, but I gathered that, basically she was feeling some type of way because she had initially as a child done something to someone else. And so naturally she felt like, oh, they're going to come back and get me, because she'd done something to someone first. It's not that someone was just coming after her. She did something first to someone else. And as a result, then, yeah, you pretty much should be looking over your shoulders. So also okay, so they went to a beach house, that was kind of like a pit stop before they went to the beach in LA. She was kind of nervous about it. She didn't want to go. The father or her husband kind of, encouraged her, the children really want to go. So they ended up going. She agreed to go. Excuse me. The son's disappearance once they get to the beach, he walks off to use the restroom. He didn't really disappear. He just got a little distracted. He came out of the bathroom, and that's when he saw the sign that she saw, her other self saw as a child. Merlin's Forest. He saw that and probably even contemplated going in there. We don't really know if he went in there or not, because, he got distracted by then the guy that's standing, kind of like in front of the Merlin's Forest with his, with a coat on, the red jumpsuit, and there's blood coming from his fingertips. So okay, at first I'm like, is the guy gonna snatch him? The guy's just standing there. Um, we kind of learn later that there is a group of doppelgangers, or people from below, or the tethered, so to speak. Um, and the guy's kind of standing in the position that all of them are standing in once they kill their quote unquote real selves at the top. Then they get into this position where they're all holding hands, kind of like the t-shirt that was seen in the movie, where it's a picture of the world and all the people and children across the world are holding hands from different, continents and things of that nature. So that's what position the guy is in. So then he hears his mother calling him. He runs back. At some point, she's like, don't you ever run away like that. She's hugging him. She's terrified that, he could get lost, but she's also terrified of the other things lying ahead. Like I said, she's not afraid of someone necessarily coming after her randomly. She's afraid of someone coming back to do to her, or worse, what she did to them, or worse. And then there was the part when that I forgot about, when they were walking on the beach in LA, when they first came onto the beach. You saw their shadows, and the camera kind of lingered on them walking and their shadows kind of like in lockstep with them. When you're walking and your shadow is kind of right behind you. To me, that was a sign. It made me think automatically that perhaps the movie is not about these quote unquote normal people and just other people just randomly coming to get them. Suppose this movie is about people as well as their shadow selves. The people, the four of them, Lupita, her husband, and her two children walking onto the beach in LA, and then the camera shining the spotlight on their shadows following them. It immediately stuck out to me. Okay, this is hinting to something. And then once I got towards the end, then I was like, oh, that's what that meant. So then you have like them in the cabin. She sees she's tucking her son into bed, and she sees a picture he had drew that day of him standing outside of Merlin's forest, and the guy, and the blood dripping from the guy's fingers. And she's like, what is this? And who is this? And he's like, I don't know. And that's when the lights go out, and she's telling her husband, I saw a real girl there. She looked just like me, and I just been feeling like ever since then, she's gonna attempt to come after me. I feel like she's been trying to get me my whole life, and it's not really making any sense to the husband, but he's kind of like, trying to make light of it, and she looks really scared. She looks really nervous. At some point, the lights completely go out in the home, and or no, not just yet. The lights didn't go out yet. They're standing in their room, and they're talking about the situation. And the little boy, who was supposed to be in bed asleep, he comes up behind Lupita and her husband in the movie, and he's like, Mom, and they're like, what? They're all scared. They're already shaken up because of the story she just told her husband. And the little boy's like, Mom, there's a family standing in our driveway. I'm like, oh my God. So she immediately starts gathering her children. Excuse me. She immediately gathers her children. And the lights go off at some point. The husband's like, no, I'm gonna go out there and talk to them. She's like, no, just stay in here. He's like, no, I'm gonna go and talk to them. So she's got all her children. She's got the older girl, her older daughter, and her younger son by her. And she's got them kind of like holding on to them. And she asked the daughter for her phone so she can call the police, which the police never arrived. Stopping right there, okay, the police represents to some of us, when you call the police, you're looking for aid, you're looking for help, you're looking for them to help you in whatever situation you're calling them, to help you for. The police weren't able to aid her. They weren't able to aid her or her family. And at some point we find out why they never made it to help her and her family. So that was a sign for me that when you're growing spiritually, when you're growing intellectually, when you're growing physically, and you get to certain points in your life, you will experience and go through things at times where the help that you seek may not necessarily be available to you. So they were seeking to get the police over there to the house to help them because all they know was that there was a family standing in their driveway, and they never made it to them. The police never made it to them. And that's because there wasn't any help that could come to them externally. It was something that they had to deal with internally. So I immediately picked up on that too. So now we have, the husband outside, and he's like, first he's polite. He's like, can you please get out of our yard? Do you guys need anything? You need any help? They're just completely silent. So he's like, okay. He goes and gets his bat. He's like, y'all want to act crazy? Because we can act crazy. So at that point, the two children alongside of the adults that are standing outside scatter into the bushes like roaches. That was kind of creepy. But anyways, at that point, eventually, like, you hear like glass breaking, like someone's coming in through one of the bedrooms. You hear pounding and banging at the door. You even hear someone whistling. At the beginning of the movie, the little girl who got lost in Merlin's forest, it's like she was afraid because the lights went out and she was, walking through, and Merlin's forest is full of different mirrors just staring back at you. All you see is your reflection and a reflection of things around you just staring back at you. So she sees her reflection, and it looks like she's attempting not to be afraid. So she starts whistling, and she's whistling the Itsy Bitsy Spider. And at some point, she thinks she's seeing her reflection, but then she realizes quickly that it's not, because it's another little girl, same hairstyle, same everything, looks just like her, but her back is turned to her. And then slowly but surely, the little girl turns around to reveal that she, in fact, looks just like the little girl that was initially walking through whistling. And so at that point, there is the arrival of the doppelgangers, but they're not really just doppelgangers. They're actually, what I find out later, their representation of the shadow selves of us as human beings. Yes, you can run into people that look like you, whatever the case may be, but at the same time, these were not just people that looked like them. They were representations spiritually of their shadow selves, the parts of us that lie below. We have higher selves and we have lower selves. And they represented the lower selves of the parents and the two children. So I went back to the beginning because as the red, or they had on red jumpsuits, the ones that were from below, they were known as the tethered. Now, the tethered, they had on these red jumpsuits, and I feel that they were the shadow selves. So they were coming to kill off all of the ones that were their twins that lived on top, because they felt like it was unfair that they, were suppressed. It was unfair that they lived down below, and they felt as though it was time for them to make a stand and, live above and have opportunity just like their other selves got a chance to. So that was their plan, to come up top and kill off their real selves so that they would have a chance at opportunity. They felt like the people that lived up top, the other version of themselves, they felt like they were spoiled. And they felt like, why shouldn't we be able to, enjoy living up top too, and having opportunity and different things like that too. And the reason why I mentioned the beginning where the little girl is walking through Merlin's forest, whistling, is because there's that part right before all the doppelgangers are in the house with, Lupita and her family, Lupita and her family. Right before that happens, you hear whistling of the itsy bitsy spider. So I'm like, this tethered, like, she is crazy. Like, she's mimicking everything about the real Lupita. So they're in there now, and the tethered are saying well, the one that's speaking for all the other tethered is Lupita's shadow self. And she's like, what did she say? Oh, she's like, yeah, it'd be really nice if, we got a chance to experience some of the things that you all experience. You're spoiled, you're greedy. You take advantage of the fact that you have these opportunities. And it's time for us to have a chance at it too. That's basically what she's saying. And she tells this story about a little girl who went into Merlin's forest. So I'm thinking at first that she's talking about what gives the appearance of the real Lupita. And she's like, little girl went into Merlin's forest, and that's where she met, her doppelganger, and she's like, it was that act of God that they met each other that night. And she told the story and is showing how at some point the real Lupita was snatched by her doppelganger, and brought down to the beneath is what they called it, I believe, and chained to a bed, handcuffed to a bed. And her tethered self, her shadow self, escaped to the top and pretended to be her, pretty much. She started living with her parents. You know, they were going crazy looking for their child, and then eventually they found what they thought was her. And so I guess in a sense, you kind of get the feeling like, okay, which one is the real one? Like, because the tethered is telling this story. You're already viewing the tethered as the tethered, and the real Lupita, so to speak, as the real one. It didn't click for me until after the movie was over with, who the real one was. Excuse me. So the tethered goes on to live this normal life with the real one's parents. You know, she looks just like their daughter, so they had no reason to think or believe that they had been switched or anything like that. So at some point, the tethered was asking, you know, why couldn't the little girl, you know, bring tethered girl with her? Why couldn't they both live on top and see the sunlight and see the stars? You know, why did, you know, why couldn't the girl, you know, bring both of us with her to live on top, you know, with her parents? And it comes off kind of like, you know, Lupita as the tethered version, the one in the red jumpsuit. It comes off as if she's being kind of greedy. Like, this life didn't belong to you, but you expected someone to just give it to you. And so now you're mad because you didn't have a chance at it. So now you want to kill everybody. That's kind of how it came off to me. And then I started to realize other things as the movie went along. So, eventually, because I'm skipping some parts because I'm only talking about the parts that stood out to me. Like when the tethers kind of either were killed or, you know, disappeared. At some point, Lupita's family ended up at their neighbor's house. And, you know, their house was overrun by their tethered versions too. And, you know, it showed first off the little girl, the real little girl and the little boy, you know, kind of like killing them off one by one. Somehow Lupita ended up handcuffed to the bed in that house, in their neighbor's house. And the tethered father went out looking for her husband. And the tethered mother was like trying on the makeup and stuff of the real version of herself. And, you know, she's looking out the window at the fight or whatever between her tethered husband and the real Lupita's husband. So at some point, the daughter comes to help her. She gets kind of like tackled by the doppelganger or tethered woman neighbor's twin or doppelganger or whatever. But then the son comes in and he has this like amethyst crystal statue maybe I'm reading too far into it, but amethyst stands, amethyst crystal brings about calmness. You also can, it has many meanings to it, but like using it to travel, travel spiritually, open up and make your psychic powers more pronounced. It has many different benefits to it. And I know that traveling, spiritually, I forget the terminology for it because it's not prominent on my mind right now, but traveling while you're asleep, while your body is physically sleeping, your mind is still awake. The amethyst can help you to travel to other realms. He hit the doppelganger neighbor, the woman, with the amethyst statue and knocked her out cold. It's like he brought a sense of calmness or peace to the situation. So that's what amethyst represents the most to me. They were able to free the real Lupita, and also to start, heading out. Eventually, the father came into the house and met them. He had killed off the neighbor's husband, who was the tethered version. At some point, they're deciding to jump in the neighbor's car and leave there. And the father's like, I think we should stay here. We got everything we need or want. The real Lupita, and I say that with quotations, but she's like, you don't get to make the choices anymore. We're going home. At some point, they're leaving out the house to get into the car, and she realizes she doesn't have the car keys. So she goes back in, and the neighbors, one of the daughters, the tethered version, whom Lupita's daughter kind of pushed over the railing over onto a glass table. She gets up while Lupita's getting the keys. She gets up, and Lupita, she started going off, like she started stabbing her. She started, hitting her until she wouldn't get up and move anymore. And the son, I guess, came in to check on her and to see if she had found the keys. At that point, Lupita screamed out in a very animalistic type way. And she kind of sounded like the tethers, the tethered versions of, I'll just say the shadow selves. A lot of them, well, none of them talked. They just made like these animalistic sounds and grunts, And when she killed her neighbor's shadow self version, Lupita screamed out in a very animalistic way. And the son was kind of standing there like looking at her like, what just happened? Like he was trying to figure out like what. She's looking at him and she's like, let's go. And he's kind of standing there in a state of shock. She's like, let's go. And she grabs his arm. They kill the tethered version or the shadow self of her daughter along the way. And then they arrive at their house, in which her son, well, not her son, but her son's shadow self is standing in the driveway, and their car is burning in this huge flame behind him. They didn't notice, but there was oil coming all the way to where they had stopped the car that they were driving in. the shadow self of her son also had a match in his hand, and he was going to light the match, and then the flame come all the way to the car that they drove up in and blow it up. So she's trying to find a way to like kind of calm him down or keep him from doing anything to her and her family. And her son's like, everybody out the car, you know, to the dad and the sister. And he's like, it's a trap, it's a trap. All of a sudden, he holds up his hands and he walks backwards because he realizes that he can control his shadow self with how he moves alone. And the shadow self of the boy walked backwards too, with his arms raised up until he walked all the way back into the flame that was overtaking their family car. And he died. That was a victory just then. And then the shadow self, so-called shadow self of Lupita, picked up the son and ran off with him. So Lupita, it also was surprising to me because she supposedly hadn't been to that, you know, that beach in years since she was a little girl. But somehow she knew to go looking for her son in Merlin's castle of mirrors. And she didn't just go in and go into the regular mirror part. She went in and she went into a secret like trap door, which led to beneath where all the tethers lived. And she seemed to be kind of like more familiar with the place than she should have, because she had never gone down there as a child, unless she did. You know, it's just, I was like, how does she know to go down there? You know, she's never been below before, or was she? So, Shadow Lupita, she's talking to her at some point, and she's cutting out pieces of paper. She's writing on the chalkboard, and she's like, you know, that's why I have to kill you, because, you know, we've actually been planning this for years, and, you know, we knew that today was the day. So she was getting different signs and hints and synchronicities before all of this even happened. The real Lupita, before all of this even happened, she was getting signs that something was off. And this was the day that the tethers had planned to come after their real selves. So at some point, the shadow self of Lupita and the real Lupita began to fight. They're traveling in different areas of this particular building that they're in, below Merlin's castle. Oh, and by the way, the mirror is represented in Merlin's castle magic as well. They are known portals, and also mirrors are used in a lot of magic. So I digress. I go back to the story where, you know, as Lupita and her shadow self are fighting, as you can see, like the real Lupita, so to speak, the so-called real Lupita, she's following the shadow self, her shadow self, and she's trying to stab her, she's trying to hit her, and then she'll jump up and move, and she'll stab the real Lupita, or she'll hit the real Lupita, whatever the case may be. It was, you noticed that, like, as they were going along throughout the building, they would go from, this well lit up area into darkness and then into light and then into darkness and then into light. That stood out to me too. That the light and the dark are not too far behind each other. In fact, they're one and the same. They're just opposite ends of the spectrum. So they end up coming along, the real Lupita, so to speak, so-called real Lupita, ends up coming into this room where all the Tethers' beds are. And her shadow self is kind of hiding. She's looking for her. And all of a sudden you see the shadow self stand up, and she's about to attack Lupita, but Lupita ends up stabbing her through the chest or the stomach, can't remember. And she starts gurgling, choking on her own blood. So at that point, and I'm talking about red, I'm talking about the shadow self in the red jumpsuit. At that point, she starts whistling. And I'm like, okay, so is she the real one, or is real Lupita the real one? Now I'm confused because real Lupita never whistled during the movie. Only Red did. That was something else that stuck out to me. And remember, the real little girl who went into Merlin's castle when she was little, she whistled, and then she was switched with her shadow self. So all of that stuck out to me. So as she was whistling, so-called real Lupita wrapped her arms with her handcuffs around her shadow self, Red, her neck, and snapped her neck. And she screamed out in that animalistic way again. It was so weird. I was actually kind of confused at that moment, like as to what was going on. And she rescued her son. She realizes he's in one of the lockers behind her, and she hugs him and kisses him, and he's staring at her like he knows something is off about his mom, like something's not right. But I realized in the end, I was thinking to myself, okay, clearly this has to do with our shadow selves. So when you think about it, we represent light and dark. So the shadow self of the people represented the darkness, and then the real people represented the lighter versions of themselves. The shadows came with a vengeance to take the place of their quote-unquote lighter selves, because they were tired of being shunned down below. They were tired of being insignificant, and they were tired of being cast off from everyone else in society and not getting a chance to live their best life too. We all have a lighter self and a shadow self within ourselves. And the lesson that taught me was that, first of all, the real Lupita was not the real Lupita. Red, her shadow self, was really that little girl that was walking through Merlin's castle whistling. She was the real one. The real Lupita was actually the tethered one. And she switched places with the real one when they were little girls. And she was afraid that the now shadow self of hers, who actually was the real version of hers, was going to come back to take what was initially hers to begin with. Not afraid of her stealing something from her, but taking back what she initially stole from her now deemed shadow self. So the lesson in the end for me was finding balance. The light cannot exist without the dark, and the dark cannot exist without the light. So as we both have as we all have higher selves as well as our lower selves, we have to find the balance between the two. When you suppress things and hold things in, because you deem it dark, you deem it not allowable or applicable in certain circumstances. And so you just shun that side of you. You're not dealing with your issues. So you're suppressing them. And as a result, they're going to fly at you, and become bigger than what they should have been, what they could have been, if you would have just acknowledged and dealt with. So I learned in the end, like, there's some things about all of us that we may not necessarily like or agree with or necessarily accept. Some of us may pretend we don't have that side of ourselves because it's so dark we can't bear to look at it or stand to acknowledge its presence, but it's there. The only thing you can do is acknowledge that it's there and cultivate. First, you have to acknowledge and accept all parts of you, light and dark, in order to eventually find the balance between the two. You have to accept and embrace all parts of you, in order to also see that there are some aspects of self that need to be revised, that need to be changed. First, you have to love yourself. You have to know what your aspects consist of. When you see certain aspects of yourself that you may not like or may not agree with, you have to go to the source of things and find out why that aspect exists within you. Then you don't stop there. Once you find the answer to that, now you have to find the balance between all of the aspects. And the only way to do that is to acknowledge that they all exist and heal. In order to heal, you have to be willing to grow. So it's like in the end of that movie, we thought she was killing the darker side of herself, the evil side of herself, when really darkness won in the end. And that's what happens. Things will rise up within you and seek vengeance if you do not deal with them. They will have vengeance on your life, vengeance on your relationships, vengeance on your future, and you will not be able to move forward when you can just deal with the situations, deal with those things within you so that you can heal and properly move forward. If you don't, then you'll have a battle within yourself. And we already have battles within ourselves on a daily basis where, we're trying to decide if we should do this or not do this. When it comes to bigger things in our lives, if we do not find the balance between the two selves, then it will be an ultimate detriment to ourselves. And you will fight a holy war within yourself between you and your other aspects. It doesn't necessarily have to happen that way. Balance is the key, though, at the end of the day. And that's pretty much the lesson that I learned from that entire movie. Do not suppress, acknowledge and embrace. Find and seek balance. So that's what I got from it. Now I can finally listen to everybody else's version of their explanations on us. I also saw lots of rabbits in the movie, which can be associated with magic, can be associated with us having many versions of ourselves. I saw lots of number 5s. And when you deal with the spiritual meaning or explanation of the number 5, it deals with changes. And there was lots of symbolism of the number 5 right before the shadow selves came up to the top to kill off their initial versions. Really, the shadow selves were the original versions of those people. And it was the ones that lived up top that were cloned and made number 2 to the shadow people that live down below. Remember, you can get the light from the dark, but you can't get darkness from the light. Light originates in darkness. So in the end, I saw that the shadow self ended up winning that war because, like, it spun out of control when it could have been handled totally different from how it was. And I hate that the shadow self of Lupita died at her hands in the end, because it was the type of movie where there should have been a part 2, my opinion. I'm a horror fanatic, so I loved every bit of it. It wasn't scary to me at all. And how she talked, like, that was amazing. It was so amazing how the shadow self of Lupita talked. I was like, wow, like, it was so amazing. But anyways, so that's my take on Us. I loved every bit of it. It was many different levels of and dimensions of lessons in there for us. It's up to us to receive that. But I thank you guys for listening. And if you have any questions or comments, please comment down below. Click on the bell so you can get notifications for future videos. Give me some suggestions on what you'd like to hear me talk about. Also, like and subscribe. And I will be back with more videos in the very near future. I'd like to hear what you have to say or what your take was on the shadow selves versus the real versions of themselves. So definitely comment down below. Let's chit chat about it for a little while, because I love talking about these types of topics anyway that have multi-levels of meanings. But anyways, I'm gonna go now. So I hope you all have a blessed evening. Peace and blessings be. And I look forward to speaking with you guys soon. Peace and blessings.